Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Friday for the continuation of yesterday's webinar. We are going to, just to let you know, we are going to start from the beginning of the presentation again for those who did not see it yesterday. And also, we are going to be doing a recording, which I'll get out to you today. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to Grant and enjoy today's webinar. Thanks.
Great. Good morning. My name is Grant Thompson, and I'm a solutions architect at MG Technology Group. We're a cloud services provider based just outside of Seattle. To give you a little bit of background of myself, my role as a solutions architect means that I have to learn about lots of different technology, both things that we use to run our services as well as things that are outside the organization. So I have a lot of experience in a lot of different products. I focus primarily on the Microsoft stack, so Windows Server, Hyper-V, SharePoint, Link, Exchange, and of course PowerShell, tying all those things together. If anybody has any questions outside of PowerShell, feel free to contact me. I work a lot with our partners, resellers, to help educate, troubleshoot, come up with good solutions for them and their clients. So today we're going to be covering PowerShell. Labeled this kind of a level 200, level 300 course. We did a level 100 course back a couple months ago. The recording for that is available. If you haven't seen it or want to go back for a little refresher, you can find that online. And without further ado, let's jump into this. We're going to cover several topics today, but just to give a brief overview of PowerShell again, PowerShell's pretty simple, but it can be very complex, so it's got a lot of power. A lot of people I've met, especially techs, field techs that are out there working on managing servers, shy away from PowerShell or have because it's intimidating. It's something they don't know. They think maybe they have to be a programmer to do it. Certainly programming skills help, and things will make sense to programmers more quickly, but if you have no programming skills, you can certainly learn how to use it and do some quite sophisticated things without that. It was designed to make management to be able to automate as well as have scripts that you can rely on to do repetitive tasks. Most of Microsoft's products, server products now, use PowerShell as the back end to the graphical user interface. So when you go into Exchange, for example, you make a change to an on-premise Exchange server. At the very end of the wizard, typically there's a button that will show you the PowerShell script that it will run, and when you click Finish, all it's really doing is executing that the PowerShell script behind the scenes. It's a great way to learn as well. What can you do with PowerShell? A ton. I say just about anything except make a latte. I mean, it's not entirely true, but you know, obviously you can do just an amazing amount of things, some of which wouldn't be possible unless you were using some other tool or writing your own you know, C# program or your own VB script or something like that. And PowerShell is a lot more flexible in a lot of those areas. Some of the things on the screen here you can do, everything from basic stuff like resetting a password. We use it to generate a lot of reports. System Center uses it for monitoring of remote systems, to run tests, review event logs, those kinds of things. You can also write your own functions. You can write your own PowerShell modules. One of my favorites out there is one that's written for Hyper-V Core, which is difficult to set up initially and to manage in certain cases, depending on what the environment's like. And they have a great PowerShell module that's free. You download it, and when you run it, you get a text-based menu system for creating VMs and turning them on and shutting them off and doing all that sort of thing that you need to do with Hyper-V. So today, one of the things we're going to talk about is the integrated scripting environment, or the ISE. It's built into PowerShell. Has been, I think, since version 2, maybe version 1, but I actually use version 1. A few bullet points down, I list out the client and server operating systems and what versions included. Most of those you can upgrade. You just have to go and download it. It's not the newer version is not built into the system or automatically upgraded. So they're on ISE 4, PowerShell 4, in Windows 8.1 and Server 2012 R2. And then, of course, you can see it goes back. I highly recommend that people learn how to use the integrated scripting environment right from the get-go. I started in Notepad or just a PowerShell window, and I have to be disciplined to not just go back to that. The ISE really has some great features in it. You can not only write your code, but you can test and run your code right from that environment. It does IntelliSense. It does color coding of your code. There's autocomplete. It's just a fantastic environment, and I'll show you in a moment what it looks like. You can run things interactively. You can have multiple tabs open. So if you're working on maybe some scripts that work together or that are similar, you can have those open side by side just like you can in a browser. For those programmers who are familiar with Visual Studio, there is an add-in for Visual Studio that's available. I think it's on Codeplex that you can download, and it gives you some of the functionality of the ISE inside of Visual Studio. It does not allow you to run PowerShell scripts in there, but it gives you some of the IntelliSense, and you can take advantage of some of the native Visual Studio functionality. One of the big things that we use that for is check-in, check-out code management through Team Foundation Server, so that you can have, say, a script that does a particular piece of management stored in a central repository so everybody has access to it that should, and you can do versioning. So if there's modifications that are made, you can see what modifications were made, by who, when, go back and look at previous versions, that sort of thing. So that's very useful. Internally, we use that as our script repository, but we do most of our development of those scripts in the ISE. So variables, this is another thing that's borrowed from or that's part of programming. For those of you who aren't familiar, their variables are ways to store objects, kind of go back to algebra. And we use those inside of PowerShell so that we don't have to retype things, and also to abstract scripts, meaning maybe you have a script that's going to do a particular thing in Active Directory, and you may specify a domain controller in there. If you use a variable for that, then you could run it on any domain controller and it would work. And you wouldn't have to modify the script each time you move it from machine to machine or connect to a different machine. One of the differences with variables in PowerShell is you don't have to declare them. In most programming languages, you have to declare your variable. You have to say what type it's going to be, what kind of data it's going to store. And in PowerShell, you don't have to do that. They always start with a $sign in PowerShell. So anything that starts with a $sign, you know, is a variable. PowerShell will automatically determine the type based on the value that gets assigned to it. It will even change types if you change the value that's assigned to it. And it uses the standard Microsoft.NET framework types. For those of you who are not programmers, go to msdn.microsoft.com. That is where all things that are programming for Microsoft pretty much live. And there you can search for .NET types and find not only what they are, but also see what methods or functions are available and what features those things bring, because most of that comes into PowerShell when you use it. For example, string in .NET, the string type has the ability to split on a character, like maybe you have a comma separated values file. That line has values that are separated by a comma. You could use split to break up those distinct values using the comma as the separator. And in PowerShell, we inherit that functionality automatically, so you then have that available to you when you're working with a string. Sometimes you need to force a particular type of a variable, and what PowerShell is going to do with it is not what you want to do with it. In the fourth bullet point down here, I give the example of storing a number as a string. If we were to do that, normally PowerShell is going to convert my 72,300 to an integer, but by putting square brackets in the type before my variable, I'm telling PowerShell I want this to be a string, treat it as a string, and so it will. There are many aliases, alternate names for types that are built into PowerShell, for example, string here. You can also use .NET notation and types that maybe there aren't aliases for by spelling them out completely. So that's that next bullet point down. I think my pointer will work here. I get up here, yeah, right here where it says system.int32. That's saying I want a 32-bit integer from the system collection, and I can use that inside of PowerShell. And just like with .NET, we can extend types. If you're a C# programmer or have somebody that you know who is, they could actually build a custom type for you or extend one of the .NET types to do some really fancy stuff. And we're going to talk about arrays. I'm going through these slides rather quickly because we're going to dive into looking at a lot of this stuff actually in PowerShell, look at the ISC, and there's a couple of topics that we're going to cover, signing and remoting, that are going to take us a little bit of time. So hopefully you can go back to the recording and review this, or email me if you have questions about any of this stuff. So arrays. An array is like storing a spreadsheet inside a variable, is the way that I like to think of it. It's rows and columns, essentially. It can get much more complex than that, but that's a pretty simple definition. Very useful versus just a regular variable. Let's say that we're going into Active Directory and we want to pull a list of users out of Active Directory. If we put that into an array, then we have an easy way to do things like loop through all of those users and take some action, set a property, read a value. And so PowerShell will automatically use the array type when you get a collection of something, like get AD user will return users. And if more than one comes back, it will automatically turn that into an array for you. You can also explicitly declare them using @ and then open and close parens. And so if you need an array, you want to build your own, and you're not going to create it by getting some collection of something, then you can do it that way. One of the things that comes up a lot in scripting with arrays is the ability to detect whether a variable is an array or not. Again, let's take the example of getting users out of Active Directory. Maybe I've got a specific filter and a search base, so I'm looking for users in a particular OU, and when I'm writing the script, I expect that I'm going to get back 5 or 10 users. I know PowerShell is going to create an array, then maybe I'm going to loop through those and change the manager of all those people. And maybe later on down, after I've done that task, I take that script that I've written and say, well, I can abstract this, and then anytime I want to change the manager of a set of users in a specific OU, I can run this script. So you write the script to maybe accept some input from you, the OU or filter parameters for the get AD command. You save it and you move on. If you go to run that on an OU that only has one user, or that has no users, or maybe none that meet your criteria that you've set out, you're not going to get back an array. And then when you try to loop through it, your script's going to break. It's going to stop because it's not going to be able to loop through something that has only one. And so this third bullet point down is a very easy way to detect whether a variable is an array. So in this case, on the left side, my $ variable would be whatever variable you're working with. And then we have these operators, is or is not. And then we specify the type, just like we did if we wanted to explicitly declare a variable of a specific type. We use system.array. And so then we could use an if statement to say, if this is an array, then loop. If it's not, maybe then we want to check to see, does it have 1 or 0 in it, and act accordingly on that within our script. And then finally, with an array, you can convert a variable to an array by using the same declaration that you would use to declare an empty array, but putting a variable inside the open and close parentheses. In this case, fourth bullet point down, I'm converting a variable $var to an array, and I could also have assigned that to a new variable. So on the left side, I could have maybe $myArray equals @ open open paren, $var, close paren. So I'm essentially changing this, get the pointer back up. I'm essentially changing this, so then I would leave my original variable unchanged, but assign it to a new variable with a new name now stored as an array. It's important to understand that those are fixed arrays, which means that there are some limitations to what you can do with them, but we could have an entire PowerShell or entire session just on arrays and array management. So those are really good things. Very handy to use inside your script. So next we're going to talk about script execution, signing, and remoting. So one of the things that comes by default in PowerShell is they restrict scripts from being run pretty much period. And that's kind of a security by assuming that things are the worst at the beginning and then forcing you to make some changes there. So the execution policy initially is set to restricted, and I'm going to show you how to change that. It's really important to understand what the different options are when you're dealing with the execution policy and not just override it, set it to unrestricted, and move on. Sometimes if you're in a pinch, that can work really well. Maybe you don't have the ability to sign a script, so you might just need to really quickly set that and then do what you do, and then make sure that you turn it back on to whatever it is. You can also set this by group policy, so in your customer environments or your environment, you could set up a group policy that would be scoped specifically to certain servers and set it maybe to remote signed or whatever you need for your particular environment. The recommendation is that you set it to all signed, and we'll talk a little bit about script signing. What that does is it means that a script has to be signed by using a cert in order for the script to execute, and of course that has to be something that's trusted by the server that it's going to execute on. So that provides you with good security protection. You can also scope your execution policy based on users and other parameters. So you might let administrators write things that are run things that are unsigned, although I still wouldn't recommend that, but you can do that. You could also set it so that administrators could run it if it's signed, but normal users can't run it at all. Not that normal users should be accessing your servers anyway, but just in case maybe they are. Maybe it's a terminal server or something. So without belaboring that point, I'm going to show you a few things here. So this is a Windows Server 2008 R2, kind of plain out of the box. It's a domain controller, and it's obviously got PowerShell in it and the PowerShell ISE. So I want to show you that first. If it's installed, which I thought it was by default, but apparently it's not always installed by default, and I don't know what the conditions are that makes it not, but it is available in Server Manager under Add Features. You can find it if it's not installed there. And then, of course, you can download the newer version if you have an older version. This is whatever comes with 2008 R2. So if I right-click my PowerShell, I've got PowerShell pinned to the taskbar. If I right-click it, I get the option to run the PowerShell ISE or just run a regular PowerShell window. If we open up the ISE, I'll show you a few things about it. Since it opens. There we go. Oh, somebody changed my view. So there are a few different things to note. Typically there's 3 windows here, but oh, that's probably because I haven't done anything yet. So at the top I've got my script where I can actually write some script, and then down below I have a PowerShell window where I can run commands. For example, I can run get command, and it will then show me my results up at the top. So a couple of things. This is native to PowerShell, not specific to the ISE, but if you start typing a command and hit Tab, it'll auto-complete, and you can also just keep hitting Tab, and it'll rotate through that. Likewise, if there are options for that particular command, you can do a hyphen and then tab through what those different parameters are for that particular command. So that's very handy. And if I start typing things in the ISE, I should get some IntelliSense and autocomplete. I also get, let's go back to my script window there. Now it looks like I'm used to. So if I start writing a script, let's just copy this one out here so I can show you a little bit about variables and strings at the same time. So you'll notice a couple of things. I just pasted this in for speed, but I've got this variable I'm calling my string, setting it to my name. You'll notice that it color codes that variable for me, so it's very easy for me to read my code, versus if I were in a PowerShell window, if I actually paste that in, it's going to execute my code rather than let me type it and then execute it later. And if I want to test my code, I can click the little play button and it will actually run my code, and I can see the output at the bottom. And while we're here, I'll explain what this is doing. So I've declared a variable, my string. Probably would have been better to call it my name, and then assigned it to with a string of my name. I've converted it to uppercase. That's, again, coming from the .NET functionality that's inherent to the string type. And then I've used this method split, and I'm splitting on a space. And so that's going to split my name up into two different distinct objects, two different strings there, and that's why they're output on separate lines. The toUpper command only output my name in uppercase. It did not alter what's in my string. If I wanted to do that, I would do my string equals my string to upper. And now when I run that, my split is going to show my name in uppercase, and it's not going to output this because I'm assigning it to my string. And of course, I could rename this variable and leave my original variable untouched. And if we take this a little bit farther, then we can show an example of an array. So in this case, I've got my name, I'm converting it to uppercase, then I'm splitting it. If instead of splitting it and outputting it, I split it into another variable. So here I'm declaring a variable, my array. And from my C# days, you got to pay attention to case. PowerShell's not sensitive generally to case. So here I'm declaring a variable, my array, and I'm assigning it the value that comes out of the split that I'm applying to my name. And what this is going to do is give me, I should then say my array, and I'm only going to get the first element in that array. I'll explain what that means. So now, out of my array, I'm going to get just my first name. And if I do this and I get the second element in it, I'm going to get my last name. So what happens in an array, we can use these square brackets to designate the index or the place that that information is stored. Since my name got split into two pieces, my array has two elements in it, one at the 0 position and one at the 1 position. Obviously, my first name's at 0, and my last name is at 1. So I could do this and then execute that. I'm going to get my first name and my last name. Likewise, I could create a loop like this. So here I'm using a for each loop, and the way these work, I'm going to say for each. I declare a new variable. I don't have to, again, specify a type or anything like that. So for each name in my array, this variable that's now holding my first and last name, I'm going to say output my name to lower. So it's going to loop through automatically each element in that array and output it in lowercase. So now when I do that, I'm going to get this. And I'll show you a more complex version of how that runs in this script right here. So this is an example of using PowerShell against Active Directory. And first thing that we need to do is import our Active Directory module. That's the PowerShell management commands for Active Directory. Most things have a module. If you install remote server administration tools, you're going to get a lot of those modules available to you. If you look on technet.microsoft.com, you will find, you can look up PowerShell module for whatever it is, and you'll find how to get the module installed, especially on a management machine. So once we do that, then we have our Active Directory commands. Here we're defining a function, which is a custom function that we can then call whenever we need it inside of our script. So that function gets declared first, and then we're going to do some things and actually take advantage of it. So I'll walk you through that, this function. So we get have our own function that we call or create, and we're specifying that it's going to take an input of somebody's username as a string. And then I'm going to declare a variable here to go get the domain controller. So we're using get AD domain controller. In this case, we're just getting them all. In this particular domain, there's only one. But for those of you who aren't into managing Active Directory, the user's last login date and time is stored on the domain controller where that authentication actually happened, and it's not replicated across domain controllers. So if you have 2, 3, 5, 10 domain controllers, you need to look at all of them and find the latest login to get the user's last login time. Setting a new variable of time equal to 0, and then I'm using that for each to loop through each domain controller. On this particular environment, there's only one, but this way this script would work no matter how many domain controllers there are. And then I'm going to get the domain controller's host name, and then I'm going to go look up the AD user, and I'm going to get the property for last logon. From our PowerShell 100 session, you can see the pipe here. So I've got one command here, get AD user, and then I'm passing that along to the get AD object, which lets me go get their last login property. Next, I'm going to see if that last logon property is greater than my time. That way, as I check each server, I'm looking to find the latest time. And then I'm going to, if it is, then I'm going to set it to be, set time to be that current one. So that way, as I loop through maybe 3 servers, the first one I go to, it was January 1st, 1901. The second one I go to, it was in 2010. So now I'm going to pick up that value. And then the third one maybe is the most recent. I'll pick up that value as well. And then finally, I'm going to check to see if my time variable is not equal to 0. If it's 0, I know it hasn't ever changed. If it's not equal to 0, then I'm going to convert the format into a date and time format that's human readable from what's in Active Directory. And then I'm going to write out the username, comma, and then the time, their last login time. So that's the end of my function here. You can see these curly braces. So all I've done so far is declare that this function get AD user last login exists and would be available to me. And then I'm going to do the script which actually is going to cause this thing to happen. And that is I'm going to set a variable of users. I'm going to go get all the AD users in this case, but I obviously could set a filter or search base so that I'm not getting everybody in Active Directory. And then I'm again going to use the for each loop to check each user's last login date. So I'm calling my custom function with a parameter username, which is what I specified up there, and I'm using the user's SAM account name in order to, as the pass-in, and that is going to show up in my getAdUser command up here. So hopefully you guys could follow along with that. So that is a fairly simple script that wasn't all that hard to write, and I didn't have to know a whole lot about PowerShell in order to get to do that. And creating something like this obviously would then be very useful, and we could extend it to format this into a report that would then be emailed out to people, users in the organization, or out to IT admins or your help desk, your ticketing system, whatever it may be. And then you could also use Task Scheduler to execute it periodically. Maybe once a month for compliance reasons you want to have a report that goes to your client that shows them the last login date of every user account in their system, so that their compliance officer can review that, or maybe that's something that you guys review and look for anything that might be unusual. So if I go into a PowerShell window here, and if I try to run that script, I'm going to get an error message. And the reason, I will say, I'm not a huge fan of help, especially in products like Office. They tend to not be very helpful, and it's the butt of many jokes. However, PowerShell, they've done a really good job at providing meaningful error messages most of the time, not always, but also they provide a great help system. And so right in this error message here, it says, hey, run this command, get help about signing to find out more about this error and how to get around it. So what we're running into here is the execution policy on this server, which is still at the default. So if I run get execution policy, I'm going to see that this particular server is set to restricted, which is the default. So the tempting thing to do is set execution policy to unrestricted. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set it to all signed, which is the best practice. Then it's going to tell me that. So then I'm going to go and I'm going to run my script again, and it's not going to do it because it's not signed. And that's a problem. So hopefully you guys have a domain controller or a machine on your customer's network that has certificate services installed. Pretty common to have that there. And so I'm going to walk you through how you get a cert to do code signing on a particular domain. So I've done some of these steps already, but I'm going to show you how they work. If we go into, we'll show you the whole thing. So if you go into Certification Authority here, it's going to open this management window. And this is my domain certificate authority, happens to be this domain controller. If I go down to certificate templates, normally code signing is not listed there. So if I go try to, I won't be able to create a code signing certificate. So you right-click Certificate Templates and click on Manage. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to see all these different templates that I can use. And I can right-click my, yeah, it's not going to let me do it because I already did it. I can create that template. See if I can find one that it'll let me do. Yeah. Oh, here's a PowerShell. Oh, that's the one I created. So at any rate, you can issue a new template. You issue the code signing template to make it available for signing. And if you guys need help with that, contact me or get online. It's pretty easy. Help may even tell you. If you guys were here, hopefully you laugh. So once I have the code signing certificate template available to me inside of my certification authority, now I need to get a certificate. And the easiest way to do that is to go to your machine's certificate services web portal. It has to be HTTPS. So if you have deployed this by default, you need to go into Internet Information Services, and we'll wait for that to load up here, and then we'll go to Sites website, and we need to enable SSL on that particular site. So we're going to right-click it. You can see my certificate services portal down there. I'm going to right-click default website, edit bindings. Of course, I've already done this, but you go add, and then you would choose HTTPS. Pick the machine's certificate so that it matches the machine name, and click OK, and you'll end up with this right here. And now I can browse too. I could just right-click from here and go to Manage and Browse, but I already have it open, and it's going to take me here. Now you'll notice I have a certificate error up here. That's because I'm using localhost. If I were to use the full machine name, which I'm not going to type, then that wouldn't happen, so you could do it from another machine. Also, you may need to open port 443 on the firewall if you want to give access to that from another machine. Then I'm going to go down to Request a Certificate. And then I'm going to go to Advanced Certificate Request, create and submit a request. It's going to ask me, do you want to let this website issue a certificate for you? Now on my templates, I'm going to find code signing. So I can come down here and use code signing. Best practice, change your key size to at least 2048. You don't have to do that, but it's just a best practice for managing your keys. SHA1 is still the default in here, and if you wanted to, you could give it a friendly name. And we're going to hit Submit. And then it's going to say, warn me again that it's going to do something, and then I can click Install Certificate, and the certificate is issued for me automatically. Now, obviously, you have to have permission. You need to be like a domain admin to get one of these certificates issued to you. And to find them, although I already have it open, I'm going to show you. If we open MMC, Management Console, in this kind of empty one, we go to Add Remove Snap-in, and we'll go down to Certificates. This lets us access the certificate stores on this particular server. In this case, I want my user account because I'm gonna sign my code myself. And then I'm going to click Finish and OK, and then I'm going to expand my certificate store, and now I can see in certificate, since it's the 10th, here's my one that expires a year from today, so that's the one I just created. Here's the one I gave a friendly name, the SMB Nation PowerShell code signing certificate. I'm going to go ahead and delete the one we just created just so I don't mess up anything else that we're going to do. So that allows us to have this certificate in the certificate store on this machine, which means now I can actually sign a PowerShell script. So once you have that, I also recommend that, just generally speaking, that I always save that MMC as certificates and throw it on my desktop because I'm always working with certificates. Once we have that, then we go back to PowerShell, And so again, we haven't done anything to our script now. In order to sign it, the first thing we need to do is we need to be able to get access to our certificate. So I'm going to use this command to access the certificate store for the current user. I only want code signing certificates because those are the only ones that'll work. Oh, and I've got to have, sorry. And I have to spell things right. More coffee for me. There we go. So that's now going to return that certificate that we created. If you memorize this thumbprint real quick, it starts with A25, ends with DA. If I go up here and I find my code signing certificate and I open it and go to details, you don't have to do this, but just to show you that we're getting it, we go to the thumbprint, starts with A2, ends with DA. So that certificate is being pulled out here. So my actual command that I'm going to do, I could do this a couple of ways. I could store that in a variable, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to use it directly. So I'm going to use this command, set authenticode signature. There we go. And then I'm going to specify the script that I want to sign. In this case, it's my get 80 user last logon script. And before I do that, I'm going to open the script one more time so you can see what it looks like, because it's going to look different. And then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to use an array in case there's more than one. Current user. Oh. I like the Y key this morning. So real quickly, what this command is doing, I want to set the authenticode signature or the certificate. I want to sign this particular script, and I'm going to sign it with, here's my @ symbol and an open paren. That means I'm declaring an array, and I'm going to use that array of get child item from the certificate store for the current user, and my equates to the personal certificates. I'm only going to pull code signing certificates, and I'm going to grab the first one. So if I had multiple code signing certificates, I could use that array index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 to specify which one I wanted to sign it with. If I only have one code signing certificate, then all that's kind of a moot point, except that it would be, again, I could use this elsewhere than where I might have multiple code signing certificates. I could use the same code over again. So I'm going to press enter, and it's going to give me, again, the thumbprint for the certificate I used, tell me that the certificate is valid, tell me the script that it's signed. And now if I go back and I open up my get 80 user, you'll notice at the bottom is this big chunk of garbage, basically, but essentially that is the certificate encrypted. And so now when I execute that script, PowerShell is going to see the signature block, and it's going to verify that the signature for that file is valid. And if it is, then it should allow it to run. So voila, now instead of getting an error message right away, it says, hey, do you want to trust this to run? And so I'm going to say run, and it's going to go and execute my script. At the top, you'll see it loaded the Active Directory module, and then here it went and got the 3 users that happen to exist inside AD, and of course, none of them have logged in ever, or 4 users, sorry, so it shows my administrator, shows my last login date as 10:38 a.m. That would correspond to the last time that when I logged into the certificate portal on this machine this morning. So now I have that signed certificate. If I modify the certificate, I need to re-sign my script, so that because the certificate not only, the signature block not only validates that includes information about the certificate, but it also includes information about the script. So if the script is modified and not re-signed, then PowerShell will know that the script has been tampered with. So hopefully everybody's following along. I'm going to try to jam through PowerShell Remoting real quick, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. If we do run out of time, I can hang on the line longer, and I'll throw my contact information back up there, as well as it should be alongside the recording, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. So let's talk a little bit about PowerShell Remoting. Remoting is the ability to execute PowerShell commands on a remote machine. This is incredibly useful for management and also for security, because you can not ever have to log, no, we shouldn't say ever, but you don't have to log into those remote machines in order to manage them. It also means that you can automate remote scripts that would then go and touch many machines. Servers could be client PCs, and make modifications to those machines using PowerShell without having to actually connect to all of the different machines. So as we've seen with Active Directory, we can get all users. You can imagine we can also go and get computers, and then we can use the computer name to be able to create a remote session and execute remote commands against that computer. There's several different ways you can do remoting. The one I'm going to show you today is where we're actually going to connect to a remote PowerShell session on another server. So I mentioned this is plain Jane 2008 R2. It's in its own domain. We can connect cross-domain to manage other domains that are on the same network, or have connectivity at least. You could do this over the internet using SSL, obviously, for your communication protocol, though that's probably not a best practice for security, but it is done. If anybody manages Office 365 using PowerShell, they've exposed limited PowerShell functionality over the internet using SSL, so you can remotely manage their infrastructure from your local client machine. The first thing we would need to do typically in an environment is enable PowerShell Remoting. There are two commands that you typically run for that. That is, enable PS Remoting. It's one of them. We can say yes to all. This has already been done on this machine, although I'm going to not actually remote into this machine. But that goes and does most of the configuration for you. It starts, if it's not already started, Windows Remote Management Service. It sets up listener on the machine's IP address. It enables firewall exception for Windows management. And then there is also another command for enabling authentication. So enable WSMan cred SSP. This allows me to pass credentials from my machine off to the remote machine. And in this case, we're setting it up on the server side, so it's saying that the server will accept those credentials that are passed in, obviously assuming that they are valid. There are different kinds of authentication you can use. In this example, we're going to use cred SSP, which is the most common that we find when doing PowerShell remoting. If you want to learn more about this stuff, look at technet.microsoft.com and search on the enabled WSMan cred SSP to take a look at that, and it'll should have links to the other types as well. So that would have enabled the server role on this particular machine. On the client side, there is also a command to run. In this case, I'm going to remote to a SharePoint machine, SharePoint server in another domain. So from this particular machine, and I'll show you, let's go here and take a look at this computer so you can see I'm in the gm.lan domain. And I am going to run this command, again, enable cred SSP. This time the role is the client. I'm telling it the delegate computer, which is a SharePoint server in another domain. I'm adding the force command so I don't have to say yes to all of the prompts that come up. It's going to tell me that it succeeded. And then the next thing I'm going to do is create a session to connect to this remote machine. So here's my command. I'm using a variable to store the session, new PowerShell session, the fully qualified domain name to the machine, especially important since it's in another domain. Telling it I'm going to use cred SSP for authentication. And my credentials, I gave it $cred. You'll see a lot if you read online. There'll be a line before this where they'll say $cred equals get credential, and I can show you how that works. However, this command will automatically do that for you, so it's a little shortcut. It'll automatically prompt me for the credential that it needs, so I'm going to give it an admin account in that domain. That's going to take just a second. So now I have this variable that contains a new PowerShell session. And so at this point, I could do several things with that. I could send commands to that session remotely, kind of one at a time. Or in this case, I actually am going to connect to the PowerShell session live on that particular machine and be able to execute commands from it. As I mentioned, this happens to be a SharePoint server. So what I'm going to do is enter PS session, and then I'm going to pass in my session variable. And you'll notice on the left-hand side now of my prompt, it has that machine name. And so that's telling me that I'm no longer running PowerShell on my local machine. I'm actually now in a PowerShell session on the other machine. This isn't RDP. You're not actually logged into the machine as a user. This is just strictly a remote PowerShell session. Since it's SharePoint, a SharePoint server, if I do get command, which will show me a list of commands, let's see, let's do get SP start. I get nothing back if I look for commands that start with get-sp and have something after it. Normally on a SharePoint server, in a SharePoint PowerShell environment, I would see those commands available to me. In order to get those, I need the SharePoint snap-in, which is what gives me the ability to do SharePoint management. So I'm going to run this command. Now, I'm going to open real quick another PowerShell window here and show you. This is another local PowerShell that's not remotely connected. If I run this command, it's going to say this isn't registered. I don't know what Microsoft.SharePoint.PowerShell is. However, if I run it in my remote session, it's going to load it because I'm actually connected to that PowerShell session on that other machine. And now if I run this, I get all of my SharePoint commands are now available to me to run on against that SharePoint server. They're not available to run to me on my local machine. They're going to actually act on the SharePoint server itself. And so this is one way that you can do remote execution of PowerShell commands from one machine. Could be a workstation, a management workstation. Doesn't have to be a server. Certainly doesn't have to be a domain controller onto another machine. And the other thing that I could do is I could have passed scripts to the SharePoint server. So instead of entering this session, or even when I enter this session, I could execute a script now, or I could have simply enabled that remote session. Instead of entering the session, I could have said, okay, send this script to that session and execute it. And the SharePoint server would then have executed that particular script remotely without me having to be interactive with it and it would return the results. Of course, you could take that one step further and build the remoting piece into another script. So if you had to manage multiple machines, again, you could create a script that would get a set of machines and then create a remote session to each one of those, execute a script or execute some command, move on to the next machine, then the next machine, then the next machine. And so you could make changes to an entire network's worth of machines using a single script run from a single management station, assuming that you had taken the time to enable PowerShell remoting on the machines that you wanted to manage and set up the execution policy, and if need be and as recommended, signed your PowerShell script with a certificate that was valid for the machines that you're executing it on. So I'm going to go back to PowerPoint here and give you a couple of things, resources. There's a great book that I always push. I should contact him and get royalties. It's called Learn Windows PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. Don Jones, he's written several books. This is a great one. You can take and literally, it's kind of spend an hour a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and he takes you through a lot of functionality in PowerShell. So you can essentially go through that in a month and come out pretty well versed. technet.microsoft.com, excellent technical reference. PowerShell.com, PowerShellPro.com. And then, of course, colleagues. Obviously, I put myself out there and say, contact me if you have questions, you're trying to solve something. I learn a great deal, as well as share a great deal through that, so we can learn from each other. And then, of course, your favorite search engine that you might want to use. A lot of people have published their scripts out there on blogs and things like that, so you can take advantage of those. Codeplex also has a ton of modules, functions, and things like that you can download. So throw my contact information back up there again. We can always jump back to PowerShell session. We have a few minutes left, and so if anybody has any questions that they want answered, if they're fairly simple, then we can take them on the call. If it's something like, hey, I've got this crazy complex PowerShell script and I want to help troubleshooting it, that's something that we'll take offline.
So, Grant, first of all, thank you for doing this presentation. I know our audience is really excited about it, and I received a comment from David CV saying it was really valuable to him. And he actually also has a question. His question is, can arrays be multidimensional?
Yes.
Okay, great. We do have another question here, and actually this is the last question I have lined up. So if you do have a quick question, go ahead and use the questions feature. This question is from Raj Patel. He's actually based out of Oregon, and his question is, can you add comments in your script layout that explains the reason for your script?
Absolutely, and commenting in scripts is highly recommended. Real quickly, if I can find my mouse here, I will show you another script here, this one. So you'll notice here at the top there's a hash, and then the rest of that line is commented out. Likewise, if maybe there's a line of code that you tried and it didn't work, you can comment that out as well. While we're here and maybe people are thinking up questions, the other thing that I wanted to show, but we were running out of time, is you can add parameters to your script. And so here I'm adding a couple of parameters. Both of them happen to be mandatory. I'm adding my own help message for the parameter and the type, and then what the variable will be used for that parameter. So when I'm in PowerShell, if I call that script, I can use the same thing like I can with a normal PowerShell script. If that's because I've never done this one. We'll do that real quick. So it'll prompt me for the parameters. So in this case, it's asking me for an OU, and then it would ask me for the output file path, which are the two parameters in there. So Raj, to answer your question, yes, you can use comments, and then bonus, you get to see how to do parameters.
Okay, great. Thanks, Grant. So I actually don't have any other questions lined up. So I'm just going to do a really quick call for questions before we close out today's presentation. And while people are trying to get in last minute stuff, I'm just going to remind you that I will send out an email today with this replay. I'll also include the replay link for the PowerShell Level 100 session, so you can have all at once. And Grant has graciously allowed us to put his email address on there as well. So if you have any other questions that you can't get answered here, you can always shoot him a quick email. I don't think there's ever been a time with him that he hasn't picked up the phone or answered an email. So he's really, really easy to get a hold of. All right, well, I don't have any other questions, so I'll just say thank you again, Grant, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.